Hello everyone, welcome to the Mysterious Stories channel, where you'll discover the most mysterious, scary, and fascinating stories. Make sure to turn up the volume and get ready for a spine-chilling experience you won't forget. When I was a young man, fresh out of basic training, I found myself in the thick of the Vietnam War, a world away from home. My squad was assigned to a remote outpost deep in the jungle, surrounded by thick canopies and silent shadows. The journey to the outpost took us through narrow trails, barely visible in the dim light, with the distant hum of the jungle filling the air. It was a place that seemed to have its own pulse, its own secrets hidden in the trees. Our mission was standard: monitor, patrol, and hold the line. But the thing that made it strange was our base's old radio equipment. The bulky radio we used was outdated, practically a relic. Corporal James, our radio operator, was the only one who knew its quirks well enough to coax it to life. He would sit for hours, headphones on, tuning in and out, listening to fragments of signals, voices in broken English and code. On the third night, a strange thing happened. James had set up the radio for our nightly check-in, but as he adjusted the dials, his face turned pale. He motioned for us to be quiet, holding up a hand. Then, faintly, through the static, we heard a voice crackling, distorted, but unmistakable. Echo Charlie, requesting backup. The words dragged, thin and tired, like they were from another world. The voice was distant, but strangely clear, coming through stronger than any signal we'd picked up before. We all knew those call signs, but no one from our unit had reported needing backup. We listened, gripped by a strange tension, as James tried to respond. But there was only silence, save for the steady buzz of static. He tried again. "This is Corporal James, receiving you loud and clear. Do you copy?" No answer, just silence stretching out like a thick fog. Then, after a long, chilling pause, the voice returned. "We're here in the trees." Lost. The voice trailed off, haunting and hollow. As the transmission cut out, an uneasy quiet settled over us. We looked at each other, and in the dim lantern light, I saw the same fear reflected in their faces. As night settled, casting long shadows over the dense jungle, the eerie feeling from earlier still lingered. The team gathered quietly around their dim campfire, each man tense, glancing over his shoulder at every rustling leaf. Charlie was the first to speak up, his voice barely a whisper. "That signal, it didn't sound like anything from our frequency. Too weak to distant. Anyone here think it was one of us?" The men exchanged uneasy glances. Thomas, a sturdy soldier with 5 tour under his belt, clenched his jaw and muttered, "Whatever it was, it shouldn't be out here. We're alone in this sector. No friendly unit within miles." As if on cue, a chill wind swept through the jungle, carrying with it a faint echo, an unintelligible whisper that seemed to fade in and out, like a forgotten melody lost to the trees. Parker, the young radio operator, fiddled nervously with his gear, pretending not to notice, but it was clear. Every man felt it. The captain, after assessing their reactions, decided to brush it off. "All right, enough of this. We're professionals. Get some rest. We move at dawn, eyes and ears open till then." The men lay down on the damp jungle floor, keeping their weapons within arm's reach. It was a fitful sleep for everyone. Shadows seemed to dance just beyond the firelight, and the night was filled with unnatural stillness. Squad Lost Hill 360 for requests back over. He froze, recognizing the call sign from the doomed unit that had gone missing weeks prior. Their patrol had vanished without a trace. Last heard requesting backup from Hill 360 for a desolate, enemy-infested location that even local villagers avoided. The static persisted, now shifting to the faint sound of Morse code, but something about it felt wrong. It was slower, deliberate, almost like someone or something was trying to mimic human signals, but didn't quite understand the language. Parker's eyes darted around, desperate to wake the others, but his body felt paralyzed with dread. Finally, he managed a hoarse whisper, "Guys, wake up. I think I just heard the lost squad." The men stirred, groggy and disoriented, until Parker's words sank in. They gathered around, expressions blending disbelief with the underlying fear that perhaps the stories they dismissed as jungle myths were just tales. The captain looked at Parker sharply. "Are you sure?" Parker nodded, swallowing hard. It was them, their call sign. But the signal, it sounded like it was from a bad dream, like they were calling from somewhere they shouldn't be. A heavy silence hung in the air. Finally, the captain, with a mix of resolve and apprehension, muttered, "All right, let's check the equipment. Maybe there's a malfunction. Maybe we're catching interference from another unit." But no one leaves their post. No one ventures outside the perimeter. The men nodded, but the fear in their eyes was unmistakable. Hours passed, and the night dragged on, each minute heavier than the last. Just before dawn, when the jungle was at its quietest, another sound crept in. This time, it was footsteps, the unmistakable crunch of boots on dead leaves, heading toward their camp, slow, deliberate, and close. The men froze, instinctively gripping their rifles, eyes wide in the dark. They strained to see, but no figure emerged from the shadows. It was as if the night itself had come alive, walking with silent malice. Just as quickly as it began, the footsteps stopped, leaving an eerie void. For a long moment, no one dared to speak. Then, a whisper came through Parker's radio, faint and crackling. "Help us find our way." The voice was distorted, barely human, yet filled with a sorrow that struck them all to the core. Each man knew they'd crossed into a part of the jungle that held memories of the lost, the forgotten, and those left behind. They realized with dawning horror that their mission was no longer about the enemy they could see, but the ones that lingered, unseen, from a war that refused to end. As dawn broke, the captain finally ordered the men to move, breaking the spell of the night. But each of them knew this was only the beginning of their haunted journey. The squid moved at first light, leaving their haunted camp behind with silent relief. The jungle was alive with the soft rustle of leaves and distant calls of birds, but none of the familiar sounds could erase the eerie chill from the night before. Even the captain, hardened by years of combat, seemed on edge, his gaze flickering toward shadows that clung a little too long. Parker stayed close to the middle of the formation, the radio strapped tightly to his back. The static-filled voice from the radio still echoed in his head, that tortured plea for help. It was too real to ignore, and the further they trekked into the dense forest, the more he sensed they weren't alone. By midday, the squad reached a high ridge overlooking a desolate valley. Hill 364 was visible in the distance, a jagged, barren mound rising from the thick jungle. The place was legendary among the troops, avoided due to the unexplained disappearances and whispers of the lost squad. They had no choice but to move closer, as their orders were to investigate the area for potential enemy activity. As they set up a temporary outpost to rest and regroup, the captain pulled Parker aside. "What exactly did you hear on that radio?" he asked in a low voice, his eyes fixed on the distant hill. Parker hesitated, unsure how to explain. It was broken up, like something was blocking the signal. But the voice was desperate. "Sir, it sounded like they were trapped or lost." The captain's expression darkened. "Keep that radio on, and alert me the second you pick up anything. We'll approach slowly. Keep tight formation. Let's make sure we're not walking into anything unprepared." The men gathered their gear, and with rifles raised, they made their cautious descent toward the base of Hill 364. As they drew closer, a heavy fog rolled in, shrouding the hill and muting the sounds of the jungle. It felt unnatural, almost as if it was meant to keep them from seeing what lay ahead. The silence grew oppressive, broken only by the occasional snap of a branch or crunch of leaves underfoot. Then, just as they reached a clearing at the base of the hill, Parker's radio crackled to life once more. The sound was faint at first, like a whisper carried on the wind, but soon grew louder, filled with static and distortion. "Is anyone out there?" The voice was ragged, hollow, and unmistakably desperate. Parker froze, his hand trembling as he adjusted the frequency. The voice repeated, clearer this time. "We're lost, trapped on hill 360 for send help." The squad exchanged glances, a mixture of fear and disbelief settling over them. The captain gestured for silence, motioning for them to listen. A minute passed, then two, as the voice continued, punctuated by the crackle of static. We can't find a way out. Everywhere we turn, it's just fog and shadows. They're watching." Parker's heart pounded in his chest. He had never felt so sure that they were hearing the final words of men long dead, somehow still trapped in a nightmarish loop. One of the soldiers, a young recruit named Michaels, whispered, "Sir, is it possible that they—" The captain cut him off, keeping his tone firm. "We stay focused. We have a job to do." But as they resumed their approach, moving up the slope of the hill, the fog grew thicker, clinging to their skin like damp cloth. The air turned cold, and a strange unease settled over them. Shadows began to emerge within the fog, drifting just beyond reach, shapes that seemed human but faded as soon as they tried to focus. As they ascended, Parker noticed something strange. Footprints, dozens of them leading up the hill and disappearing into the mist. The prints were recent, and they matched the standard tissue boots worn by American soldiers. The captain knelt down, studying the prints with a grim look. "Stay close, and keep your weapons ready," he muttered. The squad continued in tense silence, every step feeling like a journey into something far more sinister than the enemy territory they were used to. The shadows in the fog grew more distinct, and Parker could swear he heard faint voices, echoes of soldiers calling out, muffled as if trapped in some invisible prison. Then, out of nowhere, Parker's radio crackled with sudden clarity, louder than ever. "Help us, we're still here trapped on the hill, don't leave us." The voice was joined by others, a chorus of distorted pleas overlapping, each one desperate, filled with terror. The captain raised his fist, signaling the squad to halt. His face was pale, his eyes fixed on something just ahead. Through the fog, they saw them figures in tattered uniforms, faces gaunt and hollow, eyes wide with fear. The figures stared at them, and in a sudden, horrifying moment, the squad realized these weren't enemy soldiers. They were the lost squad, or what was left of them, lingering in a state between life and death, trapped in an endless loop on this cursed hill. One of the phantoms took a step forward, his hand reaching out, lips moving in a silent plea. The captain's voice was barely above a whisper, "We need to leave, now." The squad turned, moving quickly down the hill, hearts pounding with a mix of fear and horror. Parker felt the weight of those trapped souls bearing down on him, their pleas ringing in his ears as they fled. The fog seemed to close in, the figures growing fainter behind them, yet their whispers lingered, haunting them as they made their escape. Reaching the base of the hill, the fog lifted, but the cold dread remained. The captain ordered a quick head count and, once he was certain they were all accounted for, led them back toward their camp in silence. No one spoke of what they had seen, but they all knew the hill was cursed, and those soldiers, the lost squad, would forever be trapped, calling out to anyone who dared to come near. The phantom radio operator's call still haunted Parker as they returned to base. He knew it wouldn't be the last time he heard those voices. The squad returned to their outpost in silence, each soldier weighed down by the events on Hill 364. The fog, the voices, and the haunting figures on the hill had left a chill in their bones, that the humid jungle air couldn't shake. Parker kept glancing back as they marched, half expecting to see the phantoms from the hill following in their shadow. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the dense trees, and despite the heat, he felt as if a cold draft was following him, winding through the squad like a ghostly hand. That night, they set up camp by a small river bank. The captain ordered them to stay close and maintain their guard, although everyone was eager to avoid conversation. No one wanted to speak of Hill 364, as if uttering the name would summon the spirits they had left behind. As they sat around a dim fire, sharing the few rations they had left, Parker adjusted the radio strap to his back. He didn't know why, but he felt compelled to tune in. Perhaps he was looking for some confirmation that what they had seen was real, or maybe he was hoping for some sort of explanation. Just as he started adjusting the dials, the radio crackled to life, making him jump. It was faint at first, a hiss and whisper that sounded almost like a passing breeze. But then, just as he was about to turn it off, a familiar voice cut through the static, sending a shiver down his spine. "Trapped Hill can't get out." The voice was unmistakably one of the soldiers they had seen on the hill. Parker's heart raced as he listened, his hands shaking. "Captain, you should hear this," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The captain took the radio from Parker, listening with a grim expression. The voice on the other end was faint, but clear enough to recognize the desperation. "They're watching every step, can't escape." The captain clenched his jaw, his eyes flicking toward the shadowed jungle around them. The other men exchanged fearful glances, tension growing thick as the message continued. "Help, please don't leave us here." Suddenly, the voice shifted, changing to a chorus of overlapping whispers, each one frantic, pleading. They overlapped in a chaotic symphony of despair, the voices of lost soldiers echoing through the night. "We're still here, Trap, don't leave." The captain switched off the radio abruptly, silencing the voices. For a moment, there was a stunned silence among the men, only broken by the sounds of the jungle. One of the younger soldiers, McKinley, whispered, "Captain, do you think they know we're here, that they're watching us now?" The captain's jaw tightened, his gaze fixed on the dark jungle. "I don't know, but keep your eyes open, we're not alone out here." As night fell, they set up a watch rotation. Parker drew the midnight shift, feeling his nerves prickle as he took his position by the edge of camp. The jungle around him was eerily quiet, the usual sounds of insects and animals muffled, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Hours passed in tense silence. Just as he was starting to relax, Parker felt a chill brush his skin, cold as ice, seeping through his uniform. He tightened his grip on his rifle, scanning the darkness. Then, from somewhere deep within the jungle, he heard the faint crackle of a radio, followed by that familiar, pleading voice. "Help, can't get out." Parker's pulse quickened, and he held his breath, listening. The voice grew louder, closer, as if the unseen soldier was approaching. Shadows began to shift at the edge of his vision, figures moving just beyond the firelight. He stumbled back, his heart pounding as he squinted into the darkness. It wasn't long before he saw them faint, ghostly shapes drifting between the trees. Their eyes were hollow, their faces twisted in despair, and they were all looking directly at him. "Parker," one of the ghosts whispered, his voice cracking with desperation. "Don't leave us here, please." He recognized the face. It was the soldier from the hill, the one he'd heard on the radio. Parker's voice caught in his throat. He knew he should wake the others, warn them, but he was frozen, trapped in the gaze of those haunted eyes. The soldier took a step closer, his form flickering like a dying candle flame. "Don't abandon us, stay with us." Just as Parker was about to scream, a hand gripped his shoulder, pulling him back into reality. He turned to see the captain, his expression grim and alert. "Stay focused, Parker," we're dealing with something beyond our understanding, but you can't let it break you," the captain whispered, his tone firm. Parker took a shaky breath, nodding. The ghosts faded back into the shadows, leaving an unsettling silence in their wake. As dawn approached, the men packed up, casting uneasy glances at the surrounding jungle. They knew they couldn't stay here, but leaving meant risking further encounters with whatever was haunting them. "Stay close, stay alert," the captain ordered. "We're not done here yet." As they moved forward, Parker felt the weight of unseen eyes following them. The ghosts of Hill 364 weren't finished with them, not yet. The squad pressed onward, each man glancing nervously over his shoulder as they trudged through the thick jungle. It was clear that the experience on Hill 364 had changed them. Their once confident steps were now tentative, every snap of a twig making them jump. Parker, especially, kept close to the captain, who seemed to be the only one holding them all together. They reached a small clearing where the captain ordered them to set up camp for the night. As they set about preparing the area, Parker couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The jungle around them seemed alive, thick with the energy of those who had died here. He half expected to see the ghostly figures from the hill emerge from the trees, their hollow eyes following him. He quickly looked away, trying to focus on setting up his tent. The captain gathered everyone for a final briefing as night began to fall, his voice slow and steady, though the strain was evident in his eyes. "We're here for a reason. We can't let fear get in our way. Stay alert, watch each other's backs, and remember, don't let anything draw you away from camp." They nodded, though the fear was evident in their faces. As the men settled down for the night, they each took turns keeping watch. Parker drew the last shift, just before dawn, a time when the jungle seemed almost peaceful, cloaked in a hazy mist. As he sat, rifle in hand, a strange sound drifted through the quiet. At first, it was barely noticeable, just a faint whisper carried on the breeze. But, as the minutes ticked by, it grew louder, more distinct, a familiar static crackle. Parker's heart raced as he recognized it. The radio, which had been silent since their last encounter, was coming to life on its own. The crackling gave way to a soft, almost pleading voice. "Parker, help us." He gripped his rifle tightly, every muscle tense. The voice sounded distant, as if it were coming from the edge of the jungle. Shadows began to shift in the fog, forming into human-like figures just beyond the firelight. "Come back, don't leave us here." Parker felt an overwhelming urge to answer the call, to step into the mist and find those voices. But he remembered the captain's warning and forced himself to stay put, his fingers tightening around the cold metal of his rifle. As he watched, the shadows grew clearer. Ghostly figures in military uniforms moved silently between the trees, their faces blank and eyes hollow, as if they were looking for something they had lost. One of them stepped closer, breaking from the line of trees and moving towards the camp. Parker's breath hitched as he recognized the figure. It was a soldier who had gone missing months ago, a man from another platoon who had never returned from a night patrol. The ghostly soldier stopped at the edge of the clearing, his eyes meeting Parker's. "Why did you leave us?" he whispered, his voice filled with an eerie calm. "We're still out here waiting." The figure reached out a hand, beckoning Parker to come closer. Every instinct told him to run, to wake the others, but he was paralyzed, caught in the cold gaze of the ghostly soldier. Just then, he felt a hand on his shoulder, and he turned to see the captain standing beside him. The captain's face was pale, but his grip was firm as he pulled Parker back. "Remember, Parker," the captain whispered, his voice filled with resolve. "They're trying to lure us away. Don't give in." Parker nodded, his heart pounding. Together, they watched as the ghostly figures faded back into the mist, their expressions unreadable, leaving only an unsettling silence in their wake. As dawn broke, the squad prepared to move again, each man casting wary glances at the trees around them. The fog lifted, but an oppressive weight hung in the air, a sense that the jungle itself was watching, waiting. The captain led them onward, his voice steady as he gave commands, but Parker could see the tension in his eyes. Whatever haunted this jungle wasn't done with them yet. As they pressed forward, the radio crackled again, but this time, the voice was clear, authoritative, a voice they all recognized. "Captain, this is command. We're receiving strange transmissions from your location. Can you confirm?" The captain hesitated, glancing at his men. He picked up the radio and replied, his voice steady. "Command, we're here, but there's something out here with us." A brief silence followed, then Command's response, "Hold your position, we're sending reinforcements." But deep down, they all knew no reinforcements could help them. Whatever haunted this place was beyond the reach of any military force. As they marched, Parker felt the eyes of the jungle upon them, a quiet warning echoing in his mind, "Don't look back." As the squad pushed further into the jungle, an eerie silence settled over them. The usual sounds of birds and rustling leaves were gone, replaced by a stillness that gnawed at their nerves. It was as if the jungle itself were holding its breath, watching their every move. The men walked close together, heads on a swivel, each step taking them deeper into the heart of this haunted land. The captain led, his expression a mask of grim determination, but Parker could see the weariness in his eyes. They all felt it, the weight of whatever was out here with them, unseen yet undeniably present. The radio, which had fallen silent at the command's last transmission, suddenly crackled to life once more. The voice was faint, a whisper that barely broke the quiet. "Don't leave us." The voice was different this time, softer, more pleading. Parker's blood ran cold as he recognized it. It was the voice of a friend he'd lost months ago, a soldier who had vanished on a night patrol and was never seen again. Parker felt his feet slow as he listened, the voice tugging at him like a physical force. He could almost see his friend's face, worn and pale, staring back at him from the shadows. "Come back to us," Parker, the voice whispered. "Stay just a little longer." Parker shook his head, squeezing his eyes shut as he tried to block out the sound. But the voice grew louder, each word filling his mind with a painful clarity. The captain saw his hesitation and moved to his side, his voice barely a whisper. "Parker, don't listen, it's trying to pull you in." But it was too late. The figures in the mist were growing clearer, moving towards them with outstretched hands. The squad watched in horror as ghostly soldiers materialized from the fog, their faces twisted in silent anguish, each one a memory of a soldier lost to the jungle. One of the figures reached out to Parker, its eyes hollow and haunted. He recognized the face. It was his friend, his expression filled with sorrow and fear. "Why did you leave me, Parker?" the ghost asked, its voice thick with pain. "We were supposed to stick together." Parker could barely breathe, torn between the instinct to run and the pull to stay. The captain grabbed his shoulder, pulling him back with a force that jolted him back to reality. "Parker, these aren't your friends," the captain said, his voice fierce. "They're just shadows, memories of what's been lost here. Don't let them take you." The rest of the squad huddled together, their eyes fixed on the spectral figures closing in around them. The jungle seemed to close in, trapping them within a circle of phantoms, each ghostly figure a reminder of those who had never made it out. With a surge of determination, the captain led them forward, breaking through the circle of ghosts. The soldiers followed, each step an act of defiance against the phantoms that haunted them. The radio sputtered again, the familiar voice of command crackling through the static. "Captain, we're losing your signal. Hold your position, we're sending help." But they all knew that no help would come. The jungle held its secrets close, and those who entered it rarely left the same. As they moved forward, the ghostly figures began to fade, their voices growing fainter with each step. Parker felt a strange sense of peace as he left them behind, their faces disappearing into the mist. He knew that he'd never forget them, but he also knew he couldn't stay. The squad pushed onward, each man carrying the weight of those they'd lost. The jungle watched them go, silent and still, as if it had finally released them from its grip. When they finally reached the edge of the jungle, the dawn light breaking through the trees, Parker looked back one last time. The mist lingered, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw a figure standing among the trees, a soldier in a tattered uniform, watching them with a quiet sadness. He turned away, following his squad as they made their way back to safety. They'd survived the mission, but each man knew that a part of them would always remain in that jungle, lost among the shadows and ghosts of those who had come before. As they reached their rendezvous point, Parker felt a strange calm settle over him. The jungle had let them go, but its memory would linger, a haunting reminder of the spirits who watched over Hill 364. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, Mystical Tales, so you won't miss out on more eerie and thrilling tales in the future. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.